Welcome to Week 7, Education 435 Math Methods online students. Let's take a minute to look into our syllabus for our learning outcomes for this week so that we know and understand what we're working toward and also what tasks we'll be completing in order to measure those outcomes. So we're in Week 7. We will reflect on current math instruction in your field experience classrooms, connect course content to those field experiences, grapple with your problem-based task, and then also differentiate that task to meet the needs of students in your future classroom. And then you are running and probably winding down your small math intervention group, and that learning outcome meets several of your course learning outcomes. And then also research and reflect on best practices in mathematics, specifically to those grade level standards and content areas, and that also connects into your tutoring group depending on what your content is that you're working on. So the way that we will assess those learning outcomes is through your discussion board, your problem-based tasks, and in your interactive notebook, looking at your conversations about your tutoring group, and then you're using that GCLM text for any relevant chapters. I believe it's from chapter 7 on. They dig into the individual areas of math, and so if you're doing a math intervention group on statistics and probability, you'll be looking specifically in this textbook at those chapters as support and reference. So as we go back into our weekly content, Week 7, oh, my apologies. Let me exit out of this really quick and open up Week 7. I'll just look at it this way. So Week 7 is going to have 2 items in it. This video will be in as a third, but it has your Week 8 discussion board. So I want you to think back as you're doing your discussion board prompt for Week 8, and I want you to think back to Week 1 where you were introduced to the standards of mathematical practice. So the document that has the SMPs are in that Week 1 folder, but that is this document also. And so you don't have to go back to Week 1 if you don't want to. But those are best practices that should be happening in schools and in elementary math classrooms on a regular basis so that students are really in the best possible learning environment for learning those math concepts. So over the course of this term that we've been together, which of those SMPs have you observed most often and which seem to be easier to implement? Do you believe that that may vary by grade level, and why or why not? If you've not been placed in a field experience, I want you to choose one of those SMPs that you believe would be easier to implement and tell me why. Choose one that you believe would be more difficult to implement and tell me why. And I want you to put both of those responses in the context of a grade level scenario. So if you're not in a field experience, I just want you to pick a grade level and then reference those standards of mathematical practice to identify one that would be easier and explain why, more difficult and explain why, but again through the lens of that grade level that you're choosing. So that is the task for your discussion board, and that standards of mathematical practice is there as a reference also. So also remember that in order to complete your interactive notebook, you have to complete or go back to Week 1. So if we go into our weekly content, into our Week 1 folder, the bottom of the page you'll be able to access your interactive notebook where you will cut and paste. Here we go. You'll cut and paste Week 7. So here's your problem-based tasks. This is based on like a first grade math, numbers and operations, and so I want you to work through this. Obviously, you will be able to work through this, but I want you to think in the mind of like a first grader. So how would you respond to these different prompts, each of them? Again, you're showing your work down here in this area. If you're doing your work on scratch paper yourself, you are certainly able to Take a picture of that and insert it into your answer here area. Also, make sure that you're talking about how you're going to differentiate that for your students. And then, as you reflect on your field experience in your tutoring project, I want you to think now, as you're beginning to wrap up that experience, what are some things that you would stop doing, start doing, or continue doing with intervention groups moving forward? So chances are this may be one of your first intervention groups that you've had going. And so if that's the case, you had a learning curve for sure. So moving forward, based on this experience, what are you for sure going to stop and know that you are not going to do in future intervention groups? What is something that you wish you would have done that you will start the next time? And what is something that you will continue to do, something that worked well for you that you want to be able to replicate in groups moving forward? And just speak to those here in that answer here text box. So reminder that you have your discussion board, these 2 tasks in your interactive notebook, and then you're working on the completion of your tutoring project. And so you're gathering information on that. That is it for week 7 as we kind of start to wrap up our term. So if you get into working on week 7 and you have any questions, please always feel free to reach out with any questions, and we will see you in week 8.